Nick, I want to switch over to the Ontario election campaign where we do have hard numbers. We've got your latest ballot tracking there. How are the parties doing?
Well, in the latest CTV CP24 Nanos tracking that was released earlier this week, we have the Progressive Conservatives at 37%, 9 points back are the Liberals at 28, the NDP are at 23. If there were an election held today, and it's not held today or this week, it would probably be a Conservative majority government. The big question is, it looks like the NDP are going to lose seats because you have to remember, Michael, in the last election, they had like 34%. Now they're down to 23. So they're going to lose some seats. The big question is, how many seats did they lose? And I think for the Conservatives, there's also a high probability that the Conservatives, even winning a majority government, will lose some seats. And it looks like the Liberals will be the beneficiaries. But who comes in second? A little too early to tell. Right now, the provincial Liberals have the advantage in terms of seat projections over the New Democrats. But there's a lot of really tight races between the NDP and the Liberals, and that could change quite quickly. But looks like Doug Ford's in cruise control. Why don't we just say he's not only in the driver's seat, he's on cruise control, just trying to get through the close of this election without making any mistake, because, realistically, he's the only person that can derail his own campaign.
I'm curious about what issues are Ontario voters really hoping to be addressed right now, and what's the top concern?
Two big clusters, actually. Healthcare, as an unprompted issue of concern, comes in at around 25% in the weekly tracking that we're doing with CTV and CP24. But cost of living has been up about 7 points compared to the beginning of the campaign, at around 19% or thereabouts. And even things like fuel or the cost of gas was nowhere, absolutely nowhere 3-4 weeks ago. And now it's actually on the radar at around, I think, 1 out of every 20 Ontarians. So think of two buckets, Michael, kind of healthcare. And the healthcare bucket includes stuff like long-term care, funding for our hospitals, funding for frontline healthcare workers. Are we ready to kind of, get out of the pandemic and be resilient for future threats? Through to dollars and cents issues, price of gas, price of housing, rising interest rates, and stuff like that. Those being kind of the two real dominant buckets of issues. And environment still does well at around 10%, but I think of healthcare and kind of economic issues as the two key things that Ontario voters want to hear about.
So it brings us back to this, I guess the theme of this episode of economic anxiety, Nick. And if voters feel this way, I mean, does that help or hinder the incumbent party? I mean, is this good for Ford or bad for Ford?
Well, usually you'd think that if people are grumpy, that it's bad for the incumbent government. We asked a question, we asked all Ontarians whether they're pessimistic or optimistic about the future for the province. And Ontarians tended to be more pessimistic than optimistic. Like I think about 45% were kind of in the negative group, and about 37% in the positive group, and the rest were neutral. But the kicker, and this was really quite striking, is that if you happen to be an Ontarian that's under 35 years of age, you were much more pessimistic. And the only group that's optimistic about the future, people that are 55 years of age, they were net positive. So when you think of that anger, the pessimism, the anxiety, it's more targeted and focused on middle-aged and younger Ontarians compared to Ontarians that are over 55 years of age.
I mean, we won't know until all the ballots are in this election, but I'm very curious what the voter turnout will be this time around. If that pessimism in the younger age groups will drive them to vote or maybe keep them home. It should be interesting.
Yeah, well, think of it this way. With healthcare as the top unprompted provincial issue of concern, you think that might not be good for Ford, right? Because in the same polling that we've done, it suggests that Ford is the most trusted on economic issues, and Horwath is the most trusted on health issues. But you know what? None of those things have stuck. And to your question, is it good news or bad news? It looks like, right now, for many Ontarians, they're probably looking at all the candidates, all the leaders in terms of risk. And you know what? Let's face it, Ford's not running against perfection. Because if he was, he'd probably be in big trouble. He's running against like other party leaders like Del Duca and Horvath. So that's all he has to do, is to be like this much taller, and then he wins. Maybe he's not tall at all politically. He just needs to like this much taller, and he wins the election, which speaks to my comment about the only person, in my opinion, that at this point in the campaign that can derail the trend line is Doug Ford himself.